back to the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Nick. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, so tell me, you've got two books upcoming, which are going to be on Amazon soon. Perhaps we start with that. So, um, the two books you've got coming up, one is called maybe Mrs. V, and one's called A House on the Cliff. Do you want to tell me a bit about those two books?
Well, Mrs. V is on Amazon now as a short story, and it's a female vigilante episode, so to speak. Her husband has been murdered, and she's not happy with how the Los Angeles Police Department is handling the investigation. So I worked from that and spent a year or so rewriting it and working it over and turned it into a complete novel. So you can read the short version that's up now, or you can wait for a little while and have the novel. It'll be up within a couple of months. And my newest new novel is The House on the Cliff, which is, I think, one of my best. It's a story of early California before statehood and a mansion built over the Pacific Ocean on an Indian burial ground by an East Coast stockbroker who's an avid art collector. And this is taking place, of course, starts around 1800. And he ships his best works of art to California around the tip of South America because the weather is so dry in California. He wants to put them in a place where they'll be protected. So this house is built, and inside it are some Rembrandts and great works of art, but no one gets to see them because the house sits vacant most of the time. And it's built before the Continental Railroad comes out to California. And so we start out with some interesting neighbors in a small town, and it grows, and we learn about people in the town and some fun events in the house. And there's some real historic figures play roles in the story as well, mixing it up with some of my fictional characters. So I think it's a lot of fun. It's a book that the whole family could enjoy. Some of my books are more adult fare, but most of them are historical novels that anyone can read. They're not vulgar or too violent.
Sure. And a lot of your novels seem to have a lot of history, historical background to them. And do you enjoy the process of researching the historical side to your stories?
Absolutely. I thought at one time I was going to be a history teacher, and I went to school at night for many years while working with my father in our plastering business. And he retired, and I took the business over. But I've always had an interest in learning, and I continue to read. And I'm kind of an avid studier of trivia. And my website at cowboyproductions52.com has my travel blog. I've been to 85 countries, including North Korea, and I'm just back from Jordan and Egypt. I was there 3 days after they started fighting in Israel again, so that was interesting. So I like looking into history and learning things, and then writing stories about insignificant events. I was on a cruise to Iceland, and I was watching a program about art, and that's what got me to write this book, The House on the Cliff. They were talking about great works of art and the Fabergé eggs, and so this book that I just finished involves a Fabergé egg as well.
And I think with story writing, writers are always looking for inspiration for stories. I can see clearly being such a prolific traveler, 81 countries. That's quite incredible. You clearly get a lot of ideas for your stories through your traveling, the people you meet, and the journeys you do. Um, with the characters, your ideas for characters, are they people you meet on your travels? Is that what Is that where you get your ideas for the travelers and for the characters you write about?
Sometimes, but as a writer yourself, it's hard to explain how these things happen.
Sure.
I don't often use an outline. I write cold, and these characters come to me and talk to me and to each other, oddly as that sounds, odd as that sounds. And pretty soon you have a group of people jabbering in the back of your head, and you just kind of take notes and write things down. And after a while, you have a book in front of you. With my first novel, the English adventure romance novel, The Adventures of the Smith Family, I had to create a family tree because I had so many characters, I couldn't keep track of them. So I made a family tree and used that to reference back
Wow.
to those people and their relationships. And that follow-up novel, Sailing Away, is the younger brother coming to London to work for an import-export company in the 18th century and his desire to sail around the world. And again, if you read the first one, you'll recognize people from the second novel, and there are letters that go back from the second novel character to his older brother from the first. So you see their correspondence a little bit. It's one way, of course. It was hard to send a letter from London out to points unknown because we had no idea when his brother would be any place at one particular time. But he was able to send a few letters back and had people carry them back personally as well, who he ran across. He had met a few sea captains along his way, and that led to some interesting liaisons with females and other people. So it's the first book is I think of it as Downton Abbey meets Robin Hood, and so it
That's good.
gives you a little bit of all of the kind of best parts of English history without too much blood and gore, but enough to make it interesting, I think.
And I think that's what I like about all your stories. They're really sort of um, quite distinctive storylines. Quite, they represent your fantastic imagination. With Mrs. V, I think you said earlier that you wrote a short story and then you've turned it into a novel. Is that the
That's
first time
right.
you've done that? Is that or you've done that
Yes,
before? Yeah.
yes. And I have a background in police science. I have a degree in criminology, a 2-year degree in criminology, and I watch a lot of true crime programs. So I'm fairly well versed in police procedures and criminal procedures. And so I find that kind of a natural, easy uh, genre for me. I have a book called Atlanta, which is a detective novel that takes place in Atlanta, Georgia. It has some very interesting characters, and it's more of an adult book, probably. But I use that background in studying in criminal justice and my history interest to create these stories. And heaven only knows where these characters come from. They all have some good and bad qualities about them, and some more bad than good, and some more good than bad. But I like detail. I like my characters to be fleshed out, and we know what's going on at home with the detectives, with their wives and their issues at home, and what's happening at work, and the relationships between the partners that work together as detectives. So I find all those things interesting, and some people might find them tedious, but so be it.
I think it's one of those things when you read a story, especially the characters has to be believable and credible and when talking about perhaps the police procedure forensics, it's got to be that even people don't know anything about this subjects have got to believe it's correct or something described. So having that, like you said you've got that background in forensic science. I think you said
Criminal justice.
criminal justice. That must give you allow you to give that sort of that believable, credible aspect that of what you describe. Um, are you always do you always have the next book in your mind? Do you sort of are you because it sounds as though I mean whenever we chat, that you never sort of take a break in that sense, and you obviously you love writing and you love storytelling, and like do you always have an idea for a book in your mind? For when you finish one book, you've got an idea of another one.
Yes, I have 3 books in progress right now,
Wow, that's
and
incredible.
great. I have 12 chapters of one book. It's a precursor to Grandpa Ernie's Secrets,
Okay.
which is my spy novel. I have a book that I've just started in my. I have a kind of a notebook I carry with me, and I'm looking at doing a detective story taking place around the time of the San Francisco earthquake in 1903, and it involves a train trip from San Jose with 2 couples that work in a pencil factory, and they're going to take a big weekend trip to San Francisco, and somebody might disappear. So that's percolating in the back of my mind, and I have a few other things going on. I Monday evening I'm going to be on stage telling a true story with the writers group.
Well, fantastic.
The singer Paul Williams, everybody knows Paul Williams. His
Mm.
wife runs a program here near where I live. It's like the Moth Hour, where people get up on stage and tell true stories. I've done that 4 times, and those videos are on Instagram and Facebook at RC Hand. You can see me make a fool of myself on stage. Uh, and I grew up in a very supervised way. My parents owned a large restaurant and bar, and I was pretty much on my own and wandered outdoors a lot and got into mischief. And so I have a lot of interesting tales to tell. And so I have a large repertoire of stories, and I have so many that I often forget them. And when one pops into my head, I send an email to myself with the title and a little outline because,
Sure.
you know, as we get older, if we don't write something down, we forget it and it may not come back.
No, I can definitely. I'm the same. I always carry a notebook around. I have notebooks all around my flat. I'm always, if I have any idea, I jot it down so I can see it. When you said you speak on the stage, and tell stories, that I mean that must be very different. Obviously, doing it through writing a book, writing it. Do you enjoy? It's very. I guess it's more personal and bit more direct and a bit more you've got a bit more vulnerability there, being on the stage. Do you enjoy that? Is that something?
Yes, and I went to work as a child in this large establishment of my father's, and so I was always around large crowds of people, and perhaps it's my nature anyway. But I thought it would be interesting to get up in front of some group of people and speak. And I never had a job where I was around a lot of people in an office setting or where people got together and talked over large programs that you might put in at work. So I thought it would be fun to tell a story in front of folks, and I've done it 4 times. I won the event once, and
Fantastic.
you win $100. And there's a panel of judges who are newspaper reporters and writers, and so you have 6 or 7 people in the industry who vote for you plus all the people in the crowd vote for you. And of course, I try to stack the crowd as best I can
Of
by bringing all my cronies with me.
course.
But they have a system to stop that from picking the winner every time, so it doesn't always make me the winner.
Sure. And
Uh,
are these true stories you tell, or
they
are
have
they
to be true stories,
okay?
and you get 6 minutes. They don't have to last 6 minutes, but I've found that 5 to 6 minutes is a pretty good time frame to tell a pretty fulfilled story in. Uh, Generally, I would end up short, so I have to practice at stretching it out a little bit because I speak fast. But
Sure.
it's a lot of fun, and
Mm.
Paul Williams gets up and tells stories there now and then also, and he has some great stories, very interesting stories, because his life is so varied and he's so talented in what he does.
And
His
what
wife
sort
is,
of oh,
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
what
It,
sort of stories do you tell? I mean, are they ones from your travels, or are they ones from early on in your life?
oh, I have some travel stories. I have a couple of interesting travel stories. Uh, but most of the stories happen about my life living in this restaurant that my father had. And my friends as a child were adult criminals and drug abusers. And so I saw a lot of things unfold at my feet. I had a shoe shine box and I shined shoes and listened to these men tell their tales. And oftentimes they would disappear for 6 months or a year and they would come back after being locked up again. And so I heard a lot of interesting stories and learned quickly not to emulate their lifestyle.
And looking at all the stories you've told and the books you've written, would you say that it gets easier the more books you've written, the process of writing? So I guess with a lot of things in life, the first time you do something, first book you write, you think it'd be the hardest, most daunting because um, the whole process of planning it, writing it, and the ideas. Do you find that the first book you wrote was the hardest and it's got easier, or is it just every time you do it's the same?
Absolutely. The Adventures of the Smith Family took me 5 years, and I would write Sailing Away at the same time. Actually, Sailing Away and the Adventures of the Smith Family was one book of 400,000 words, and most people told me that's too long of a book, so I split it in half. and rewrote it so they were two pieces of a puzzle, so to speak. And it's really a trilogy. I have a third. I've written it so the third book will come next. There's an ending to the second book that allows us to go into London and into the palace. And there's some palace intrigue that will take place under the reign of George III. And that's the third book. And I have to say, my latest book, I think, is my best book, uh, perhaps because I live in California and I'm writing about California and I know a bit about it, and the research is more recent, the history is more recent, and perhaps not as much. So that book went rather quickly, and it's a humorous book. The first half is, or the first third is kind of an introduction. It's a little bit serious and dry about history and the characters, and then we get this house built, and all bets are off because there's some funny, crazy things that happen
Sure.
in this house that no one can explain, and funny, crazy things happening in town, and it's during the gold rush, and there are some allusions made to Mark Twain being a bit peeved with the narrator of the story for reasons that we won't go into.
Sure.
But so I have a lot of allusions to real people that were living at that time.
And
It was
how
a
do
lot
you?
of fun to write. It's a fun story.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. I mean, I, I can, I can imagine, and I've read some of your books, and I can definitely say that it's they're all, whatever the genres of the books, they're all there's a fun there's all fun stories. Do you have a particular genre you like writing? Because you've written you've written sort of a bit of a variance in type of stories. You've written a few different styles. Would you say you have a particular, do you have a particular type of genre you prefer in that sense? You prefer the thrillers or the more historical ones or the funny stories?
I think I like historic thrillers. I
Okay.
I I think I was born 100 years too late and in the wrong place. I feel more comfortable in England, and I like that time of the 18th century and maybe even back another 100 years. Uh, Things weren't necessarily simpler, but they moved at a slower pace, and maybe they were even more complex because there was an ability to hide things easier than there is now with the lack of communication back then compared to now,
Sure.
and so forth. But I think I find that time frame more interesting. I have a book I've written probably taking place in the 16th or 15th century that takes place in Asia called Kazu, Son of Oshita Kamasaki, which is a
Yes.
love and adventure romance kind of story. And I'm actually rereading it right now and trying to see if I can make some improvements. But it's a story about a young man who is kidnapped on his 16th birthday and taken up into the mountains to be the head of an army and against his will. And his father has some secrets, and he meets some interesting people on the battlefield. And there's a lot of palace intrigue going on, and it could be happening in Rome in 1,000 years ago, or it could be happening in London 200 years ago. It's the same story, just told in a different location in a different time. There are only so many stories. The stories of
Sure.
people are pretty mundane. It's just the time and location that makes the differences.
And that one, the Katsu son of a Shina Kawasaki, is that where's that one set? Is it which part of Asia is it? Is it
Well, that's an interesting question
or
because,
is it kept a bit
well,
vague?
I don't want to offend anyone. And so it's kind of a fictional Asian
Sure,
country because there are some groups that mistreat other groups. And if I were to label them with a
of course.
known country, then I might have a few thousand people pounding on my front door. And I don't want that. So I've created a couple of
Okay.
countries that don't really exist, but the history of these events are true, and of course have happened over and over again throughout history.
And with your when you're researching your stories, because you write about a lot of places, you set them in places around the world, and there's obviously a lot of historical time set stories. Do you do your research on Google, or do you actually do trips, for a day or weekend and visit the places you're setting your story? and research in person? How do you, because obviously research must be, like I said earlier, touch a big part of process for you. How
I,
do you approach it?
I think what's happened is I started my travel blog. My wife and I have been married 40 years this next week, and she has always traveled. Her family were from London,
Okay.
and her uncles were tour guides in different countries. So we have always traveled together, and she before I. And so I've traveled now to 85 countries, and I have bits and pieces. I can see these towns and these faces, and I just can create a story and put it in that location. And I have a little bit of the history that we learn on these trips, and so that's kind of a combination of those things that makes it easier for me to write. I started it initially, my website as a travel blog to keep track of my adventures like a diary. And I thought, well, gee,
Sure.
if I'm going to do this, it may as well be open to the public. And it kind of went from there. I have the first chapter of all my novels there. I have some interesting personal stories there. I just put up one a couple of days ago. I had some interesting pets over my life. I've had a monkey, a dingo, a mynah bird, a donkey, for starters, and I've written stories about those four creatures, and
Sure.
we had some fun together. Uh, and so my background is a little bit different than most people, perhaps. I worked for myself for many years and worked in probably 200,000 different homes and apartments and met a lot of interesting characters. So all those memories are floating around in my mind, and they just come out when I grab a pencil. So
And then
it's
you've touched upon your travel blog. So were you writing your travel blog before you started writing your novels, or is it,
yes,
or yeah, okay. So
yes,
you
I
wrote,
think so.
okay, interesting. So
But I wrote in high school.
sure,
I wrote a short story. I wrote a lot of short stories. I wrote a little novel when I was in grammar school. I've always had a tendency to like to write. I wrote poetry as we all do when we're young. Uh, and I put it aside for my working career of 40 years. And when I retired 11 years ago, I started writing again just as a hobby and to give me something to do and to keep my brain sharp. So if I'm going to write a story about England in the 18th century, I have to learn about King George III and the colonies and what was going on with technology in England and the sailing vessels and so forth. And I find that all very interesting and put it together in what I consider an interesting book. Other people may not find it very interesting, but that's what it is.
and so you've obviously been writing, all your life since you did mention at school. Was there anything that inspired you to write? Was there a particular was there someone you knew, or did you read a particular book? Because often these things, something gave that inspiration to start writing ourselves. Was there something that inspired you when you were young, or was it
I
just
think it was my teachers. I loved reading when I was young. I was very fortunate to be in a school that had a program that focused on reading. I'm an
sure?
avid reader. And so if I'm going to write a book about the CIA, which I have started, I have 12 chapters on the OSS and World War II, which is that precursor to Grandpa Ernie's Secrets. I start reading books on the CIA and the Secret Service, the OSS, and Ian Fleming, of course, he was in the OSS, wasn't he?
He was, yes, that's
I
right.
don't know if many people are aware of that. He wrote what he
Yeah,
knew.
yeah, that's
And
true.
no one wants to read about what I know because I don't know a heck of a lot. So that's why I write fiction. And obviously, with fiction, you don't have to know a lot of important dates and places if you're writing pure fiction. But if you're going to mix in a little reality with it, you have to work a little harder, perhaps. But I don't focus so much on the dates and the places as much as the people, because always it's the people that create the novels and what makes a novel interesting.
I agree. I think a good novel will mix in spratting enough of truth and facts, and the people can, I think people can relate to it and know, and I think that makes them wonder often if there's some facts that they can understand, relate to, and know, then they can often think, oh well, actually, is the rest of it true? I think it gives, I think, having a balance of pure fiction and a bit of truth spattered means it is a good approach. Um,
Absolutely. And if you can spark someone's interest in reading and learning more, that's wonderful. And I try to think of my stories as having a little bit of a moral tone,
sure.
or at least a story that shows that being good does prevail in the end. Hopefully, that's true in life, not always, but I think my stories tend to feature the underdog and working hard and becoming successful because that's my story. That's the story that I know. So in that sense, I'm writing what I know.
That's interesting because I um yeah, about it. Obviously, I think you can write books just to entertain, but it sounds like you're saying that there is a sort of message in your books. Maybe not a big obvious one, but there is a sort of whether it's good triumphing over evil or whether it's but yeah, like you say, people the main character perseveres and succeeds in the end. There is a sort of you're saying there is a sort of story, a message in it. Is that it? Would you say that's that fair?
Absolutely. And the first book in the Adventures of the Smith family, there's a direct connection because the second main character is a priest, and the main character Lawrence has been given a gift of land by George III, uh, pardon me, by his grandfather, and he saved George III from highwaymen. And so
Okay,
this young serf is given some land, and he leaves his family and goes to a town that I created called Femstead. And the main character in that town is the priest, and he is Lawrence's surrogate father. And Lawrence uh, is involved in a lot of decent adventures and hard work where he has to do things where some men are hung for and he's rewarded. And he talks to the priest about this. Why am I being given accolades and wealth for killing a man when other men kill someone and are hung? And where does God fit into this story? And I'm not a smart enough person to be religious, but we have this conversation between Lawrence and Father Magnus, and we explore this a little bit. And I think that's a big part of the book. What
mm,
drives Lawrence? Lawrence has
sure.
nothing. He's driven to support his family. And in order to support his family, he's thrown into situations to protect his land, which then puts him on the side of the good against the evil. He didn't do it on purpose. He was forced to be in that position, perhaps like most of us are in history. We're forced to take a side.
It's a sort of a classic, more conflict, and I think you mentioned earlier about most stories have been told to an extent, and it's we're looking for ways to retell the story, using different points in time, different locations, and different characters. And I think a lot of stories is around some sort of conflict, some sort of often moral conflict or physical conflict, and the resolution of that conflict. Um,
I have to tell you that I have my neighbors read my books,
oh,
and
good.
I'm not,
Okay, that's helpful.
and to get feedback. And when I was writing The Adventures of the Smith Family, I was told that there wasn't enough of an arc of conflicts.
Okay,
So I
interesting.
needed to put in more smaller conflicts to create some excitement and adventure. And I don't take criticism very well. Most of us don't. But
No,
that person was an English teacher, and I sat down and kind of tossed in some ideas. And I think obviously she was right. It made for a better story. And so that was a lesson that I learned. And so I've learned that perhaps each chapter you have to focus on something a little different to keep the person interested. If you don't have a lot of action, you need to have things happening of one sort or another. In my sailing adventure, each day is marked as a log, and we know how many miles we traveled. We know where we are, and we sail from London to the Mediterranean, down the coast of the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. And if all goes well, we'll arrive back in London. I'm not going to mention whether that happens or not, but a
sure.
lot of things happen in between. And so we have these little adventures in Morocco and in Spain and in South Africa and so on and so forth. And so that gives me an opportunity, because the location is changing, to throw in different events, because we have a cast of crew members. Some are evil, some are good, some drink, some don't. And so when they get on land, they get into mischief and so on and so forth. So that's a excellent vehicle to tell little vignettes with different characters, and you learn about these people. and it isn't necessarily repetitious. It kind of draws you in, perhaps, I would hope, to stay on that voyage and finish that voyage.
And with your process of writing, I mean, you said you show it to your neighbors. Did you and you mentioned your 40th year anniversary? Do you show of your wife? Do you show it to your wife? Is she a is she a second pair of eyes, or is she sort of stand back and no,
Nope.
okay.
We are
Um,
we are very much the same, and we are very different. And we do not work well together in that avenue.
no, that's often the way I think with people in a close
But
relationship.
in every other avenue, we've done very well together.
Sure. And with your writing, I, I mean, there's lots of ways that, different writers approach it. Some people write a little bit each day. Some people do it big blocks and have a gap. How do you? I mean, I think you've got to be very disciplined to be a writer. How do you approach it? Do you have set times each day you do it? Do you schedule it? What's your
Yes, I'm very fortunate to be retired, and I play tennis 3 or 4 days a week. I play handball 1 day a week, so every morning I'm doing physical activity, and then I come home and take a nap, and then I sit down and I read for an hour or two. Right now, I'm reading the complete works of Mark Twain. I just finished his biography, which is a wonderful book. Uh, and so by reading, I guess I'm learning through osmosis how to put sentences together and paragraphs together. I have my own style. Someone has told me, good, bad, I'm not sure, but I have my own style. And so I make an effort every day. I stay in my office for maybe 4 or 5 hours writing and doing my correspondence. I have sent out over 20,000 emails on LinkedIn to
wow.
connect with people in the industry and just readers. I connect to college students to let them know that my books are out there. I understand they're busy reading schoolwork, but I want those younger people to know about me and perhaps read one of my books. So I was self-employed, so I'm aware of how to promote myself. So I do that. The storytelling is part of that promotion because there's people there from the industry, and I'm working on that. I do readings. COVID closed that down quite a bit.
Sure.
I have two connections right now. I'm working on to do a couple of more readings. I have a reading on my Facebook page that I did in one. Actually, I believe that was from reading from the Smith family, and so I'm working on that. And every time, like all of us, every time you tackle a new skill, you improve every time that you do it.
Of
One would
course.
hope. And so I'm hoping that this latest book of mine, it was much easier to write, perhaps because my skills have improved, perhaps because I like the subject matter more than perhaps another one. But I had a great time. And that's at the end of the day, that's
Mm,
why I write, because I find it very enjoyable. And I have my books on Amazon. Very few people have purchased them, and it doesn't matter. I'm financially successful already. I don't have to worry about writing to make a living. If I did, I'd
sure.
be living in your suitcase in your closet. But so I do it as a fun adventure. And having been self-employed, I'm looking to create another avenue and to conquer it. It's simply what a man does is to try and conquer something. And perhaps I'm a little bit afraid. And so I'm working at being better at it so I won't be afraid and can prove to somebody that perhaps I'm halfway good at it.
I think that when like as a writer or an artist, something when you do something that you share to the world, and when you write a book and you get out there, you are sharing it to the world. It takes a lot of confidence to do that. There's a bit of vulnerability there, whether people like it or not. But I think you really said the interesting, the most one really important point there, that if in life you do, if you really enjoy what you do, if you enjoy the act of creating the content, whether it's a book or whether it's a play or film, or then um if it doesn't make any money, but fundamentally you're doing what you enjoy, and I think that's the most important starting point. And I think for things to be successful, for you to make money, I think it has to start with you doing something you're passionate about and enjoy anyway.
Oh,
um
absolutely.
but yeah, no, and with the networking, it's I think that's that's such an important thing nowadays for promoting. If you look at your book, you have to network with people who are other writers, people in like you say students, writing groups, and it's interesting. You're obviously very, you send out a huge number of emails. It's obviously you understand that, and I guess because you enjoy that process, you do that. So
It's well, some things we do whether we enjoy them or not,
something
and
is true.
they're necessary.
Yeah.
And for every 100 emails you send out, you perhaps get one or two that hit the mark. I have to say that out of uh, the clouds are passing over. That's why I'm changing colors here. Uh, you out of 23,000 emails, I've only received about five responses from crabby knuckleheads that are disgruntled and unpleasant. So that says something for the human race, I think.
I think um I think that often often I mean I've got similar stories myself about when I've written short film scripts and plays and all sorts of in my over my life, and had some varying success. But I like you. I think the starting point is if I enjoy it, um, then if nothing else, I'm doing an enjoyable experience. I'm passionate about it. But yeah, I
And you
about
learn something along the way. If
exactly.
it's
That's something
if
along the
it's
way. That's that's
historical,
that's the point.
I now know why Big Ben is called Big Ben. I didn't know that until I started doing research on one of my books. So these little bits of
Mm,
information, I don't drink and go to cocktail parties. I don't drink alcohol. Uh,
sure.
but I have these little bits of information floating in my head that perhaps will lead me to write another novel. Who knows?
Well, you probably
Um,
would be good person at a party because you'd have lots of interesting sort of tidbits of that you've learned through your research.
my wife finds them quite annoying. Yes.
But yeah, I think that's the yeah, that part of that process, of I think sort of research. You find these tidbits, mini stories in themselves and these facts and things, yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's part of the process.
Well,
I think.
and I'm going to be 72. So we
Oh,
have to keep the machinery working.
keeps the old brain going, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Brain
So
trading.
so feed some stuff in there. Give
Yeah.
yourself some mental tasks to learn and physical tasks to stay in shape, and hopefully you'll live a long and interesting life.
So just to go back briefly, so Cowboy Production 52 is your main website, where you share
Yes.
excerpts from your books and some updates and videos as well. Is that right? That's the
The
main.
videos are on my Facebook page at RC Hand, and I have some travel videos on there and some readings and my storytelling. And
So
I'm not very computer adept, so I have a lot of photographs. I just came back from, as I said earlier, Jordan and Egypt, so I have photos to go up there, and I put up silly true stories on my website, and I'm amazed. I get people who come. I'll finish a story, and in 20 seconds, I'll have two people that have hit on it and read it already. I have a great deal of information on my website if you're interested in travel and history, photos and stories of things and sites you'll see in different countries, and a little bit of information that might be helpful for a traveler, might whet your appetite to go someplace.
there's a call to action there. I urge you to anyone who watches this sort of interview here, this chat, to check out RC Hand's website, Cowboy Productions 52. Have a look at sort of many books he's written, and yes, the travel stories he's got. These are true experiences through his travel to fascinating country in the world. So do check out the website. And also, as he said, Facebook, RC Hand, lots of videos there, lots of updates and stories. Um, what's next? What's? I mean, I know you've got two books you touched on at the beginning, but any more travel adventures planned? What's also what? We're just gonna.
I leave March 7th on a 3-week vacation cruise from Bali to Japan, through Borneo, Indonesia, Taiwan, the Philippines, and then on to Japan. We'll end up there for 10 days visiting with friends. So I'm going to see a lot of interesting. I've been to a few of those places before, but I'm sure we'll see more. And I'm going to take some videos. I don't take enough videos when I travel. I'm going to take some videos and put up on my Facebook page for everybody. And on Instagram. So yes, and I just hope people will come, and it's pretty cheap to come to my website, and there's not a slot there where you got to put a quarter in, and you can see a lot of fun things, and then learn more about me.
I love hearing about your travels, and I always find it inspiring for myself, to hear the stories of people's travels, and it makes me think, right, I want to go to these places, and I get excited and inspired to hear about it. So I look forward to hearing about your next adventure, your next trip. And I
Great.
think it's interesting you said about posting something up and getting comments. I share a lot of short stories on my website, and it's interesting to look at the sort of statistics of where people are around the world who read it, and
Yes,
you can see people in America and India, and it's quite
yes.
fascinating where these people are who read the story. So it must be.
And I bring business cards with me and I hand them out everywhere I go. And I have people from like you all over the world coming to visit, and it's so fun. And
Yeah.
I have, in fact, my wife and I are going uh, to a country next year that will remain nameless due to circumstances beyond our control. And I have responses from those folks through my emails suggesting that I not come because
Hmm.
things are a bit dicey.
All right,
But
guy.
that's what makes life interesting. At
It is.
72, one has little in front and a lot in behind. So a short adventure may be better than a long, dull existence. So
I
we'll see how that turns out.
I think you can definitely say I think that you're living life to the full, and definitely yes, you're an example to all of us, about taking life for full and experiencing life and all its adventures, and yeah, no, definitely that's
And
certainly it.
you know, living in England, especially, you have such easy, quick access to Europe and all parts of the world. In America, we're a little bit isolated, and it costs a little more money to travel, but it doesn't cost a great deal of money to go someplace. And if you
No,
can save up $4,000 in a year, you can go on a nice vacation someplace exotic and learn something in the process. And if you can't, then you need to reevaluate your lifestyle and either work harder or smoke less or something and put that money to travel and learn something and meet some interesting people.
it's I 100%.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was gonna say I 100% agree. Some of the it's a big world out there, and I've only been to a small portion, but I have done some traveling around sort of Asia and a bit of Africa, and incredible experiences. And I often talk to my young son, 8-year-old son, about the place I've been, and we plan future travels together. And I used to take photos. No, I know no one prints them out nowadays. It's like a bit of a bygone thing, but I used to take photos, print them out, like all these albums. And my son is the only one I know who actually says to me, show me the ones of Africa, show me, and I sit down and I look at them. He's the only one I have to show the photos of my travels. But
But who better than he?
exactly, so
That's
different,
great time spent together.
yeah. So fun. Um, well, it's fantastic to get you back on the show, and as always, I really enjoy chatting to you, and it's so fantastic to hear about all the what you've been up to, and also you've got two more books coming out. You're off against some more travels, so I look forward to hearing about your next trip and reading your book when it comes out.